The Capital Confidential podcast is brought to you by the Times-Union, the leading newspaper in New York's capital region. Subscribe today or visit online at timesunion.com.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Oh, boy.
And in this case, it's the power to tell the truth.
Thanks, Uncle Ben.
I'm not going to... I see I've got a fellow comic book geek in my interviewer on this podcast. You and I are going to be fast friends. We'll have to do this again.
You want to deport an undocumented person? Start with me, because I'm an undocumented person.
How do we beat him in an election?
We will. I'm going to run against him.
I wish you would. I wish you would, Dad. I would.
There are things in here that are unobjectionable because they're not that effective. So yeah, sure, I'll vote for a distinctive license plate. Sure, why not?
Jim, you had your press conference at 4 o'clock.
You're having a press conference now?
That's
You're
right.
talking?
I'm having a press conference.
Well,
now.
is this your space here or is it public?
No, it's my space.
Oh, this is your
Don't
space.
interrupt.
Okay.
I'm David Lombardo, and you're listening to the first broadcast of the Capital Confidential podcast. If you're a Poozer Politics fan, thanks for sticking with me. For the other 99% of you, thanks for joining us on the inaugural ride. For this episode, I spoke with Jonathan Trichter, the potential Republican challenger to State Comptroller Tom DiNapoli. Trichter is an investment banker who served as policy director for Harry Wilson's 2010 Comptroller campaign. He has been active in state government for decades and was an Ironman triathlete, marathoner, and open water swimmer before his son was born. We talked about his superpowers, the comptroller versus controller debate, and his status as a registered Democrat. Enjoy the show. What made you decide to jump into the race?
That's a great question. So I've got a particular set of skills that are uniquely suited to this office, right?
What are you, Liam Neeson?
I actually took that line from Taken. It's the reason that movie worked. It was a low-budget film, which nobody had great ambitions for. But if for all of you who saw the movie or didn't see it, you can look online for this one, I guess, indelible scene where he speaks into a telephone to the kidnappers of his daughter, and he says, I can't pay a lot, I can't do this, I can't do that, but I have a unique set of skills, and I'm coming to get you with all of them. So that's actually the inspiration for that line. Because, I'm not Liam Neeson, I'm not as successful, I'm certainly not as handsome.
I've never met you in person, so I'm not going to judge yet.
Thanks. I assure you I'm not as handsome. I do have this background that's particularly suited to this one task, and that is the controller's office. It's an office I covered as a public finance investment banker at J.P. Morgan, and that's where I became familiar with the office and really inspired by its potential to do so much good. So on the flip side of that, I got frustrated with where the office had actually gone. From the private sector, I looked at a government office that was meant to provide fiscal supervision to Albany politicians, then get run by Albany politicians. And they ran it into the ground, right? The prior controller was hauled off to prison. The current controller was handpicked to fill the vacancy by Shelley Silver over the objections of every editorial board in the state. And then this controller came to office not because he was qualified at all, but because he was everybody's best friend in Albany. And so it shouldn't be any surprise that he brought to bear the powers of the office to protect the Albany status quo. And we could talk about specific examples of that, but in general, I just want to point out to your audience, I don't have any friends in Albany, certainly none by comparison to the numbers that Tom DiNapoli has, and I would use the powers of the office to protect ordinary New Yorkers. And so at the same time I was inspired by the office to do so much good, I was frustrated by DiNapoli, who defined down the responsibilities of the office to such a low level of activity that somebody ought to check his pulse. So that's why, a long answer to a short question, I'm interested in running for New York State Comptroller.
So what are these skills, though, that you have? I'm assuming they're not like assassin type things.
No, I do call them superpowers in my intro video, and I do that with obviously a bit of snarky humor, but like a lot of snark, there's truth in it. This office has superpowers to do a tremendous amount in Albany. So the first superpower is the fact that the comptroller is the sole fiduciary of a roughly $200 billion public pension fund. It's not unique. There are a couple other states that have sole fiduciaries, but I think it's one of three, and it's by far the largest, so it's almost unique. If that's not, proper grammar, then sue me. But it's impossible. At the same time, it's also impossible to think of another example where a politician stipulates that something so fiscally fanciful about a huge fiscal asset, like a $200 billion pension fund, is true, and then everyone takes his word for it. And what I'm referring to there is that DiNapoli has repeatedly professed that the fund is well-funded or fully funded and ranked among the best-managed public pension funds in the country. And I'm here to assure you that nobody has ever said it's among the best-managed pension funds in the country. But if you Google New York State Public Pension Fund ranks among the best-managed pension fund in the country, and please feel free to edit this or produce this heavily. So you can stop the podcast now, you can Google it, and you could just plug in the number of times this pops up on your search, and then come back to me right now. My guess is you'll find about 8 to 12 examples of this in stock language in his press releases about how well funded and how well managed the pension fund is. It's really not. But I'm here to tell you that when it comes to pension gimmicks, no one questions our controller about his assertions that our pension fund is among the best managed in America, and the fund itself is the most misunderstood fiscal asset in the state by far. And I'm here to tell you that we have some public pension problems. So Superpower One is a sole fiduciary. He could fix it. He could start telling the truth about just how much pension debt he's hiding. And he's hiding a tremendous amount of debt off balance sheet. It's about $35 to $45 billion in hidden debt off balance sheet that our controller is entirely papering over and using all the tools available to him to obfuscate that public pension accounting affords one. And that is a significant number. 35 to 45 billion is a big number. And I can compare it. I mean, it's hard to kind of get a sense of, when you start talking about throwing around big numbers like that, how significant they are or are not. And as a relative example, I would cite the fact that the controller a few months ago released a audit on all of the state bonded debt, which is much more public. It's got much more scrutiny. There are much more disclosures around how much state debt we have in outstanding bonds. But he decried the amount. It's about $63.7 billion, according to DiNapoli. And he decried that amount as being way too high, as offering or presenting itself as a huge individual burden for taxpayers, something that the state would have to pay off over time, and that was a real sort of fiscal cliff for the state. So compare that to 35 to 45 billion in additional debt that's hidden, that isn't easy to find, and a billion here, a billion there. All of a sudden, we're talking about real numbers. So instead of $63.7 billion, which DiNapoli did the math and figured out it was about $3,100 per capita in New York State, the real number, if you add on pension debt, is more like $100 billion. Almost, from 55 to 70% more than the debt that he calculated. And so, by not telling the truth about the state's public pension debt, what we get is a poor sense of just how much debt risk that we carry in New York State, and that because of that, we don't necessarily right size and plan accordingly. And so, superpower number one: tell the truth about our pension debt.
So, when you're telling the truth about pension debt, how do you take that message to voters and share it with them so that their eyes don't glaze over, or that they can actually understand it? I mean, I cover state government for a living, and I'm barely hanging on with you. So how do you make that to the millions of people who are going to vote who don't think about the pension fund on a regular basis, and probably don't think too much about the state comptroller on a regular basis either?
Yep. So 3 quick answers. The first is I come on podcasts like yours, and I speak for 20 minutes.
And
truth to
you
power.
reach tens of people.
Well, you don't realize this, but after we speak, I'm going to open my window. I've got a megaphone, and I'm just going to start shouting from my corner window.
Okay.
And hopefully we'll reach another 20 to 30 people.
Excellent.
Easy. So I'm on a roll today. The second answer to your question is only slightly more serious, but here's a way to fit it all into the proverbial bumper sticker, right? We effectively have 80 cents for every dollar that we owe 1.1 million New Yorkers who depend on the pension system for their retirement. So DiNapoli claims we've got 94.5% funded level of our state pension. I am going to show in a Signal white paper that's going to come out in the next several weeks that, in fact, we have only about 80 cents on the dollar for every retirement dollar that we owe to New York's retirees. And that Signal white paper might not inspire the hundreds of thousands of people who are persuadable voters to necessarily vote for me in an election, but it is going to catch the attention, I hope, of influencers like yourself, editorial boards, newspapers, who start to question and scrutinize the public pension system more closely and give my whole candidacy a little bit more scrutiny and more attention. And at that point, when I think I have a stage and a real megaphone, not just the one I've got sitting next to my window to shout at people on the street before the police come to take it away, at that point I'm really going to unload with some, I hope, less than eye glaze over kind of facts, figures about the comptroller's performance over the last 10 years, and the kinds of things that, while not well known, once I highlight, will actually be eye-bulging.
You're running as a Republican at this point, right?
Yes. I'm running, I should say I'm running as a registered Democrat. I mean, I am a registered Democrat. I can't get away with that.
In search of the Republican endorsement, nomination, right?
In search of truth, liberty, and the American way, my friend.
So why run for the Republican nomination? Why not primary Comptroller DiNapoli?
Hey, who said I won't? I don't want to give away my strategy on just one podcast, but I am absolutely capable of getting on the Democratic primary ballot if I decide to do that. So it's a possibility.
And how are conversations going with the Republicans about getting them to, I guess you need a waiver to run as a Republican?
Good. Look, this office, the case that I've been making is the office shouldn't be political. And there's enough agreement about that in the local Republican and Conservative Party leadership to back my candidacy, and I think even the nomination of both of those parties. The comptroller is the chief fiscal officer of the state, and my vision is to provide grown-up supervision to children in Albany who have gotten to set their own allowance for too long a time. So, and in that respect, I think I'd be the most fiscally responsible statewide official if elected by far. And only in New York does that make me a conservative. But when it comes to bringing fiscal order to Albany, I'll carry the conservative water.
You talked about the fiduciary responsibility of the comptroller, and as a reporter, I see a lot of press releases from the comptroller regarding audits. Is this a function of the office where you would be potentially different from DiNapoli, or is this sort of the same?
Superpower 2.
Okay.
Superpower number 2. Strength and the ability to fly. Those are the big, I think, Superman superpowers, right? So this is the second one. Yeah. So the comptroller has unbelievably broad mandate by our Constitution to audit every state agency, program, public authority, and entity. And the comptroller issues a lot of audits. But I would challenge you or most of your audience members to come up with any finding that has had a meaningful, significant impact and outcome. And mostly they're just gotcha audits. And so, yes, I've got a very different vision of what I would do with the audit function of the office. I would target big-ticket items. I would go after the largest budget items, the largest problems, the biggest infrastructure that New York State is dependent upon. And I would get at meaningful findings that could translate into either meaningful savings or meaningful operational improvements so that things don't break ahead of time. How's that for an answer?
You mentioned the size of the office, and I'm not aware of the comptroller initially having any sort of managerial or administrative experience, but now he's got some years under his belt, and I'm wondering how you would take to overseeing such a large body, and do you feel like you're in a position where you're ready to manage a lot of people?
So part of my private sector experience includes working for Harry Wilson's restructuring company. And many of your listeners, maybe 30%, so 3 out of the 10, will remember Harry Wilson. I shouldn't say that. That's insulting to Harry. At least 7 or 8 out of 10.
This audience skews heavy with Harry Wilson, much more compared to the ordinary electorate. So
for those 3 people listening who don't remember Harry, he ran an historic race for comptroller in 2010, captured almost 47%, came within 3 points of winning. And after he came up just short in 2010, winning more votes, 2.1 million, than any Republican challengers in statewide office since 1994 in Pataki, he founded a boutique restructuring firm, his expertise. And I've worked for Harry on some restructuring deals where Harry led the charge going into companies with hundreds and thousands of employees. I was a key member of one such restructuring where I ran a pension piece of the restructuring. But Harry and the deal, we were so successful, we saved tens of thousands of union jobs. I helped preserve the defined benefit status of the public pension plan without major benefit cuts to workers, et cetera. And we went and looked at a company. Harry restructured it, and it was a company with, again, tens of thousands of employees. I worked with Harry on a company called YRCW where he did that. I worked on the Hostess restructuring. So I think I would take well to a large office. I think I would manage. I think my managerial sort of background experience and approach would be successful. And then strategically and specifically, I would absolutely retrain or unleash the talent of the audit piece of the office, so that it had much more freedom to go after bigger items, and I would have much more follow through in trying to execute findings into actionable, successful savings and operational efficiencies. So, look, I think I'd do well. That's the bottom line. I think I'd do well. I think I'd do better than the incumbent, and if I didn't believe that, I wouldn't run.
Why is it comptroller and not controller?
So, by convention, there's a P when it comes to the elected office and at the state and government level. When you're either nominated, elected, or appointed as controller in a governmental environment, you're a comptroller with a P. And when you're in the private sector, you're a controller without the P. But if you ask me why, I'd have to go to a search engine.
That was a pretty good explanation for me. Anything else people should know about you, whether something that's personally interesting or another qualification for the office?
Yeah, I mean, look, I have no interest in running for legislative office. I have no interest in making laws. My background is suited to this office. The reason I worked and connected with Harry Wilson and his controller's race in the first place is because I covered this office for J.P. Morgan and wanted to see something done with it. I think it's a backwater office that's underappreciated. It's got the power to do so much good for New Yorkers. We've got a huge public pension crisis in America, and New York is the financial capital of the world. We should take the lead in understanding and being honest about our own pension debts. And leading as an example to help places like Illinois, Chicago, New Jersey, which are much worse off, and New York City, whose pension system is in terrible shape, be more honest about their liabilities, and then for us start to lay out a vision and some fixes so that we could actually become fully funded and show other states and municipalities how to do it themselves. I've also worked with Gina Raimondo, a Democratic governor in Rhode Island, who brought real pension change and pension reform to that state, and I've worked in other places as well. Too often in politics, people run for office or a office that they're not specifically suited for or even qualified for, and that is a major problem in politics today. I am not running for Senate. I'm not running for governor. I'm certainly not running for Attorney General. I'm running for an office that I know I could do a very, very good job at. I believe I could be a historic controller, and I'm going to try to get the message out and see how it plays among voters.
Do you think it's appropriate for the comptroller to use the state's potential investments to push certain policy agendas? The way he says, we're not going to invest in companies that do X, Y, or Z to try to formulate change, or is that a responsibility of the comptroller to do that kind of action?
Yeah, so by way of explanation, the key tension I think that you're asking about is that the controller is required to invest pension assets to maximize returns for the system's members, right? That's a fiduciary responsibility. So it's not DiNapoli's money. He's just the custodian. But if a retiree wants to take his or her pension annuity and donate it all to the Sierra Club, that's her business. And then the controller just is supposed to ensure that the retiree has the financial flexibility to do that. But our controller claims, let me give you the most, I think, timely example, which is the decarbonization movement, right? And our controller claims that he's an international leader in addressing climate change. He's gone to UN conventions on climate change in Bonn and Paris. He's fancy. But his climate change progressive crusade is a complete political hoax because, for example, among Tom DiNapoli's top equity holdings in the state pension fund is Exxon. And Exxon has been in the top 10 equity holdings in the state's pension portfolio for the last 10 years. DiNapoli's been in office, and some of those years it's been number one. And last year, DiNapoli owned 11.6 million shares of it, worth about $1 billion. And that's only one of at least 49 other of the most carbon-emitting corporations in the world that you'll find in the New York State pension portfolio. Now, at the same time, and here's the campaign, and here's what we hear from DiNapoli about decarbonization, he's paid Goldman Sachs to engineer some kind of bespoke index that mirrors some other benchmark, but without oil and gas companies. And he's refused to disclose what Goldman Sachs is charging him for the creation of that index. So let's call it the DiNapoli Index by Goldman Sachs. Why not? and he's pledged about $4 billion. He's going to double it. So he's going to double the investment in the DiNapoli Goldman Sachs index to $4 billion this year. He has not disclosed what Goldman is charging him for the index, but we can assume Goldman doesn't work for free. And what that means is he's paying a Wall Street firm for a bespoke index, which I named after him, while simultaneously investing the equity part of his portfolio in traditional oil and gas companies up the wazoo. And only because environmental activists, and forgive me, but political reporters often don't know how to read financial disclosures.
Very true.
Does anybody think he's some kind of environmental hero, right? And so the victims are retirees who ultimately get stuck with the Goldman fees, and the activists who I think are getting the wool pulled over their eyes.
Well, John, I really appreciate you taking some time with me, and I look forward to maybe checking in again as we get a little closer to Election Day.
Thank you for having me. I hope your eyes didn't glaze over too much. Next time when I come out with what I think will be the more eye-bulging particularities of DiNapoli's performance, we'll get a larger audience. We could publish it on Facebook, and we'll go viral with it.
And that's our show. I want to thank Jonathan for being my first guest. Hopefully the listener enjoyed our opening episode. We'll be back each week, fingers crossed, with new conversations and topics. Subscribe to the show wherever you download podcasts, if that list includes iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play. And if you enjoyed the Capital Confidential podcast, leave us a rating and review. It helps other people find the show and gives us comfort in our darkest hours. Until next time, podcast adjourned.
Just heard I tried to get you.
Ah! This day sucks!